He needs his real mother. You can accept this, or you can leave.
Rachel Monroe stood at the bottom of the staircase, one hand gripping the banister as she watched Ethan's suitcase sit open on the hallway floor. Neatly folded clothes filled it, clothes she had bought, washed, and carefully labeled for school trips. Each one felt like proof of a life she was being quietly cut out of. Upstairs, the soft clatter of a toy train echoed through the house. Ethan was laughing, unaware that goodbye was already being packed for him. Behind her, Caleb knelt by the suitcase, smoothing a sweater into place. He worked in silence. He hadn't spoken to her since he announced the trip. Not since he said the words that cracked something inside her. He needs his real mother. Rachel hadn't argued. She hadn't cried. She just stood there, feeling the space between them stretch thin and cold, like winter pressing through the walls. Caleb pulled the zipper closed. The sound was sharp, final. When he stood, he finally met her eyes. His face was calm, almost detached, like this was a decision already approved and filed away. "You can accept this, Rachel," he said quietly. Then, without hesitation, "Or you can leave." In that moment, Rachel realized this wasn't about travel plans or Christmas. It was about erasing her. Before we go any further, welcome to Leora Folktales, where we bring you real stories that will grip your heart and leave you thinking long after they end. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a story like this. And drop a comment below. Let us know where you're watching from. We love hearing from you. Now let's continue. Rachel had raised Ethan since he was 2 years old. She was the one who taught him to tie his shoes, to say please and thank you, to sleep without a nightlight. She read him bedtime stories every single night for 8 years. She packed his lunches, signed his permission slips, kissed his scraped knees, and held him when he had nightmares. She never called him her stepson. Not once. He was her child. And now her husband, the man who promised her forever, was telling her that none of it mattered. Because Samantha, Caleb's ex-wife, wanted to play mother again. Samantha, who left when Ethan was a baby. Samantha, who missed birthdays and forgot to call. Samantha, who only reappeared 2 months ago, suddenly interested in being a parent now that Ethan was old enough to have real conversations. And Caleb was letting it happen. Worse, he was encouraging it. Rachel had objected, of course. Gently at first. She suggested they all spend Christmas together, or that Samantha visit for a few hours instead of taking Ethan away for a week. But Caleb shut her down. Every time. And then came the ultimatum. Accept it. Or leave. Rachel didn't sleep that night. She lay in bed beside a man who no longer felt like her husband, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of 8 years pressing down on her chest. She thought about Ethan. About the way he hugged her every morning before school, the way he asked her to draw dinosaurs with him, the way he told his teachers that his mom made the best pancakes in the world. And she thought about Caleb, about how he used to look at her like she was everything, about how somewhere along the way that look had changed. She didn't know when it happened, but it had. And now she was being pushed out of her own life. The next morning, Rachel made a decision. She accepted the 6-month work transfer to France. It was an offer she'd turned down twice before, both times because she didn't want to leave Ethan. Her company had been patient, but this was the last time they'd ask. If she didn't take it now, the opportunity would go to someone else. She told herself it was the right move. A little time apart. A chance for Caleb to realize what he was risking. A chance for her to breathe, to think, to figure out who she was outside of this marriage that was quietly suffocating her. She told Caleb that evening. He nodded. He didn't try to stop her. He didn't ask her to stay. He just said, "I think that's probably for the best." And that's when Rachel knew. This wasn't about Ethan needing his real mother. This was about Caleb wanting her gone. She left 2 weeks later. The morning she flew out, Ethan cried. He wrapped his arms around her waist and buried his face in her sweater, and Rachel had to close her eyes to keep herself from breaking down. She promised him she'd call every day. She promised him she'd be back before he knew it. She promised him nothing would change. But even as she said the words, she felt the lie in them. She kissed the top of his head, whispered "I love you," and walked out the door. Caleb stood in the hallway, arms crossed, watching her go. He didn't say goodbye. Rachel arrived in Lyon on a gray January morning. The apartment her company provided was small but comfortable, with tall windows that overlooked a cobblestone street. She unpacked slowly, trying to settle into the quiet. That first night she called Ethan. No answer. She tried again the next day. And the day after that. Nothing. She sent him messages. Funny pictures. Voice notes. Little videos of the city. Still nothing. At first she thought maybe Caleb was busy. Maybe Ethan was with Samantha. Maybe his tablet was broken. But then she saw the photos. They were posted on Samantha's Instagram. A snowy cabin. A fireplace. Hot chocolate with marshmallows. And there, in the center of the frame, was Ethan. Smiling. Laughing. Wearing Rachel's scarf. The one she'd knitted for him last winter. The one he said smelled like her. Rachel stared at the screen for a long time. Her hands were shaking. She zoomed in on the photo. Caleb was there too, standing beside Samantha, his arm around her shoulders. They looked like a family. A real family. And Rachel wasn't in it. She called Caleb. He didn't pick up. She called again. And again. Finally, on the fifth try, he answered. His voice was flat. Distant. What do you want, Rachel? She asked about Ethan. Why wasn't he answering her messages? Why hadn't he called? There was a long pause. Then Caleb said, "He's fine. He's adjusting." Adjusting to what? Rachel asked. To the new arrangement, Caleb said. Samantha's been staying with us. It's easier this way. For Ethan. Rachel felt something twist in her chest. You didn't tell me she was moving in. I didn't think I needed to, Caleb said. And then quieter, almost like he didn't care if she heard or not, he added. You're not here anyway. If you're still watching at this point, drop a comment with, I'm still here. Let's see who's truly following this shocking story. Because what happens next is going to change everything. 3 weeks later, the envelope arrived. It was delivered to her work address in Lyon. Thick. Official. Her name typed across the front in cold, impersonal letters. Rachel opened it with trembling hands. Divorce papers. Caleb was filing for divorce. And he wasn't just ending the marriage. He was accusing her of abandonment, of choosing her career over her family, of leaving Ethan when he needed her most. Rachel read the document twice. Then a third time. Her vision blurred. Her breath came in shallow, uneven gasps. There were financial details too. Caleb had frozen their joint accounts. He'd removed her name from the house deed. He'd filed for sole custody of Ethan. And at the bottom of the page, in careful legal language, was a request for her to forfeit any claim to parental rights. Because, according to Caleb's filing, she was not Ethan's biological mother. She had no legal standing. She was, in the eyes of the law, a stranger. Rachel sat on the floor of her tiny Lyon apartment, the papers scattered around her, and for the first time since this all began, she let herself cry. Not quietly. Not gracefully. She sobbed until her ribs ached, until her throat was raw, until the sky outside turned dark. She had given 8 years of her life to that boy. She had loved him with every piece of herself. And now she was being erased. As if she had never existed. But Rachel Monroe was not a woman who stayed down for long. She wiped her face. She stood up. And she made a phone call. The lawyer's name was Margaret Cross. She was a friend of Rachel's older sister. A sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who specialized in family law, and had a reputation for taking on cases other lawyers wouldn't touch. Margaret listened without interrupting as Rachel explained everything. The ultimatum. The trip to France. The blocked messages. The photos. The divorce papers. When Rachel finished, there was a long silence. Then Margaret said, Do you have proof? Any of it? Rachel said yes. She had screenshots of every message she'd sent to Ethan. She had records of the calls Caleb ignored. She had the original work transfer offer, dated months before she left, showing that she'd turned it down twice. She had bank statements showing the exact day Caleb froze her access. And she had witnesses. Friends who'd heard Caleb say she wasn't Ethan's real mother. Neighbors who'd seen Samantha move in. Teachers who'd noticed Ethan's confusion when Rachel suddenly stopped showing up. Margaret was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Rachel, I'm going to be honest with you. This is going to be hard. He's the biological parent. You're not. That gives him a legal advantage. But if what you're telling me is true, if he really did force you out and then use your absence against you, we can fight this. And we can win. Rachel closed her eyes. I'm flying back tomorrow. She landed in Boston 3 days later. She didn't tell Caleb she was coming. She didn't call ahead. She went straight to Margaret's office and spent 6 hours going over every detail, every document, every piece of evidence. Margaret was methodical, ruthless. She asked questions Rachel didn't want to answer. About her marriage. About Caleb's behavior before Samantha came back. About whether Rachel had ever feared him. And Rachel told the truth. No, she'd never feared him. But she'd stopped recognizing him. Somewhere along the way, the man she married had become someone else. Someone who could look her in the eye and tell her she didn't matter. Someone who could use a child, his own child, as a weapon. Margaret nodded slowly. We're going to court. And we're going to make sure the judge hears everything. The hearing was set for 2 weeks later. In the meantime, Rachel moved into a small rental near downtown Burlington. She didn't go to the house. She didn't try to see Ethan. Margaret told her it was too risky. If Caleb claimed she was harassing them, it would only make things worse. So Rachel waited. She went to work. She prepared her testimony. And every night, she looked at photos of Ethan on her phone, wondering if he thought she'd really abandoned him, wondering if he hated her now. The courtroom was smaller than she expected. Cold. Sterile. Rachel sat beside Margaret, hands folded in her lap, watching as Caleb entered with his lawyer. He didn't look at her. Not once. Samantha wasn't there. That surprised Rachel. But Margaret had warned her that Samantha's presence wasn't required. This wasn't about her. This was about Caleb's rights as a father, and Rachel's supposed failure as a mother. The judge was a woman in her early 60s, gray-haired and stern, with reading glasses perched on the edge of her nose. She reviewed the documents in silence, flipping through page after page, her expression unreadable. Finally she looked up. Mr. Monroe, you're claiming that Ms. Monroe abandoned your son. Is that correct? Caleb's lawyer stood. Yes, Your Honor. Ms. Monroe chose to accept a work transfer overseas, leaving Ethan without notice or explanation. She has not been present in his life for over 2 months. We believe this demonstrates a pattern of emotional neglect. The judge turned to Rachel. Ms. Monroe, how do you respond? Rachel stood. Her voice was steady, calm. Your Honor, I did accept a work transfer. But I did so only after my husband gave me an ultimatum. He told me to accept his decision to spend the holidays with his ex-wife or to leave. I chose to give him space, hoping it would allow us to find a better path forward. I did not abandon Ethan. I called him every day. I sent messages. I tried to maintain contact. But my husband blocked me. He froze our accounts. He removed me from our home. And then he filed for divorce, accusing me of the very abandonment he orchestrated. The judge's eyes narrowed. Do you have evidence of this? Margaret stepped forward. We do, Your Honor. She handed over a thick folder. Call logs. Screenshots. Bank records. Emails. Testimony from 3 witnesses who'd heard Caleb's ultimatum. Testimony from Ethan's teacher, who confirmed that Rachel had been the primary caregiver for years, and that Ethan had been visibly distressed when she stopped appearing. Margaret also submitted the original work transfer offer, showing that Rachel had declined it twice before, specifically because she didn't want to leave Ethan. The judge reviewed everything in silence. It took nearly 20 minutes. The courtroom was so quiet Rachel could hear her own heartbeat. Finally, the judge looked up. She looked at Caleb. Mr. Monroe, did you tell your wife to leave? Caleb hesitated. His lawyer leaned in, whispering something. But the judge raised a hand. I'm asking you, Mr. Monroe. Did you give your wife an ultimatum? Caleb's jaw tightened. I told her she needed to respect my decision about Ethan spending time with his biological mother. And did you block her attempts to contact your son? Silence. The judge's voice grew harder. Mr. Monroe, did you or did you not block Ms. Monroe's access to Ethan? Caleb looked down. I thought it was best. For Ethan. He was confused. I didn't want her complicating things. The judge set down her pen. You didn't want her complicating things, so you removed her entirely. And then you accused her of abandonment. She leaned back in her chair. Mr. Monroe, what you've done here is not only unethical, it's manipulative. You used your son as leverage to push your wife out of your life. And when she left, you used her absence to justify taking away her parental relationship. That is not protecting your child. That is punishing your spouse. The judge's ruling came swiftly. Caleb's petition for sole custody was denied. Rachel was granted joint legal custody and a structured visitation schedule, to be expanded as Ethan adjusted. Caleb was ordered to restore Rachel's access to their joint accounts and to reimburse her for the funds he'd frozen. He was also required to attend co-parenting counseling. And the judge made one more thing very clear. Mr. Monroe, if you interfere with Ms. Monroe's relationship with Ethan again, I will revisit this custody arrangement. And I will not be lenient. Do you understand? Caleb didn't answer. His lawyer nudged him. Finally he nodded. Yes, Your Honor. Rachel walked out of the courthouse with Margaret beside her. The air was cold, sharp, but it felt like the first real breath she'd taken in months. Margaret squeezed her shoulder. You did good, Rachel. Rachel nodded, but she wasn't thinking about the ruling. She was thinking about Ethan, because the hardest part wasn't over. The hardest part was about to begin. The first time Rachel saw Ethan after the hearing, it was at a supervised visitation center. A neutral space with toys and books and a social worker sitting quietly in the corner. Ethan walked in with Caleb, his backpack slung over one shoulder, his eyes on the floor. Rachel's heart broke all over again. He looked smaller. Older. Like he'd been carrying something too heavy for too long. She knelt down. Hey, buddy. Ethan didn't look at her. Caleb said something to the social worker, then turned and left. The door closed, and it was just the two of them. Rachel didn't push. She sat on the floor and pulled out a sketchbook. She started drawing. Dinosaurs. Ethan's favorite. For a long time he just stood there, watching. Then slowly he sat down beside her. He didn't say anything, but he picked up a crayon, and he started to color. They sat like that for an hour, quiet, together. And when the session ended, Ethan looked up at her. His voice was small, uncertain. Did you really leave because you didn't love me? Rachel's throat tightened. She shook her head. No, sweetheart. I left because I thought it would help. But I never stopped loving you. Not for a single second. Ethan's eyes filled with tears. Dad said you didn't want to be my mom anymore. Rachel reached out, gently brushing a tear from his cheek. Your dad was wrong. I will always want to be your mom. Always. Ethan stared at her for a long moment. Then he whispered, I missed you. Rachel pulled him into her arms. And this time she didn't let go. Over the next few months things slowly began to shift. Ethan started calling Rachel again. At first the conversations were short, awkward, but little by little they found their rhythm again. He told her about school, about his new Lego set, about the soccer team he joined, and Rachel listened. She didn't push. She didn't ask about Caleb or Samantha. She just let Ethan talk. Let him come back to her on his own terms. Caleb, for his part, kept his distance. He followed the court's orders, but barely. Visitation exchanges were silent and cold. He never looked at Rachel. Never spoke to her unless absolutely necessary. And Samantha? She was gone. Rachel didn't know the details and she didn't ask. But Ethan mentioned once that she didn't come around anymore. That she'd said she was too busy. Rachel didn't say anything. But she thought about it. About how Samantha had swooped in, played mother for a few weeks, and then disappeared again the moment things got complicated. And she thought about how Caleb had chosen that, had chosen to push Rachel away in favor of someone who didn't stay. It didn't make sense. But then again, love rarely did. One Saturday afternoon, 6 months after the hearing, Rachel took Ethan to the park. It was the same park they used to go to when he was little, with the big oak tree and the swings that creaked when you went too high. They sat on a bench eating ice cream, watching other kids run and shout and play. Ethan licked his cone thoughtfully. Then he said, Mom. Rachel smiled. He'd started calling her Mom again just a few weeks ago. It still made her chest ache in the best way. Yeah, buddy. I'm sorry I didn't answer your messages. Rachel looked at him surprised. Ethan, you don't have to apologize. No, I do, he said, his voice serious. Dad told me you didn't want to talk to me. He said you were too busy with your new job. But I saw your messages later. When I got my tablet back. You called me every day. Rachel's throat tightened. I did. Ethan looked down at his ice cream. I should have known. You always called me. Rachel reached over and squeezed his hand. It's not your fault. You were just a kid. You believed what you were told. That's not on you. Ethan nodded slowly. Then he said, I knew you didn't leave me. Rachel's breath caught. What? At the courthouse, Ethan said quietly. When you said you'd always want to be my mom. I knew you didn't leave me. I knew Dad was lying. Rachel stared at him, this boy who was so much braver than she'd ever given him credit for. And she realized something. He'd been protecting himself, just like she had, just trying to survive. She pulled him close, pressing a kiss to the top of his head. I love you, Ethan. So much. I love you too, Mom. Before we wrap up this story, we want to hear from you. If this story moved you, if it made you think, if it reminded you of someone or something in your own life, let us know in the comments. Hit that like button if you believe truth always wins in the end. And if you haven't already, subscribe to Leora Folktales and turn on notifications so you never miss a story like this. We've got more coming, and trust us, you won't want to miss what's next. Rachel Monroe didn't get everything back. The house was sold. The marriage was over. And there were still hard days, days when Ethan asked questions she didn't know how to answer. Days when the weight of everything that had happened felt too heavy to carry. But she had her son. And he had her. And in the end, that was the only thing that mattered. Caleb had tried to erase her. He'd used the law, used Ethan, used every tool at his disposal to push her out of their lives. But he'd underestimated one thing. He'd underestimated her love. And he'd underestimated the truth. Because the truth, Rachel learned, doesn't need to be loud. It doesn't need to fight or scream or demand attention. Just needs to be spoken. Clearly. Calmly. Without apology. And when it is, it changes everything. Outside the courtroom that day, when Ethan ran into her arms and whispered, I knew you didn't leave me. Rachel understood something she'd been too hurt to see before. She hadn't lost. She'd never lost. Because you can't lose something that was always yours. And Ethan had always been hers. Not because of biology. Not because of paperwork. But because of love. The kind of love that shows up. That stays. That fights even when it's tired. That refuses to let go, even when it's told to leave. That was the kind of mother Rachel was. And that was the kind of mother Ethan needed. Caleb had tried to replace her with someone who looked the part. But he forgot that being a mother isn't about appearances. It's about presence.